Let me ask you this, Brock. We started this debate, was it yesterday or 2 days ago? And it's one I would like to continue with DJ whenever that is.
Okay.
And that is this whole third option in the best available versus need conversation. I figured you would.
Yep, that's some tough time thought.
What is the right answer on this? Because I said the other day, I'm done with that dichotomy. I think it's a false dichotomy.
And that is, explain it.
The conversation we always have.
Available talent versus the biggest need.
Right. We hear that all the time, right? Well, what is your philosophy? Are you a best available guy or a need guy?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's not right. It's a false premise. I don't accept the premise of the question. Because the premise suggests that those are the only two options, that you're either taking the best available player or you're taking a player that you need because you have a hole at that position that you've got to fill. And I just don't.
And let's make this specific to the Seahawks. I think as this is taking form, I think as the offseason is played out, I think as free agency is played out, as John's been pretty clear on the record, I think maybe bluffing a little at times because we're into that season. But by and large, usually when he says things publicly to Bob and Dave or at the press conferences, at the owners' meetings as of this week and saying, yeah, I think we're kind of done on the free agent side of things with the O-line. We brought a bunch of guys in, gave a bunch of them physicals, talked to a bunch of them, entertained a bunch of them, and none of them, in their estimation, were the value and the fit that they wanted as they, kind of project here 3 weeks from today with the draft. So I think we can make this a pretty simple conversation in this regard. And I don't know their grades. I'm not in their war room, but you look at enough mock drafts of people that, get a little bit more feedback, that get a little more feel, the Matt Millers, the Daniel Jeremiahs, the McShays, the Kuipers, and you're starting to see receivers' names filter into that 18th pick. And what that says to me is that these top receivers, kid out of Texas, kid out of Missouri, kid out of Arizona, whatever one you want to do, okay, let's just call that receiver an 8.2. Okay, that's just his grade.
Okay.
And I remember, Salk, very clearly when I was entertaining the thought of coming out of school after my third year. Started my redshirt freshman year, started my redshirt sophomore year, played with some amazing players, truly entertained the thought because about everybody was leaving. Olin was leaving school early. Benji was graduating. Jerome was graduating. Corey had left the year before after 2 months on campus. So they were all leaving, and I thought, okay, well, let me entertain this. And I could. None of this was illegal at the time. I met with Marvin Demoff. I met with Lee Steinberg, who was borderline unrecognizable when I knocked on his door, and I thought I was at the wrong hotel room. His dip was everywhere in his mouth, and he had like no teeth. But I met with him. I met with a few other people that gave me a sense of where I fit. And there's a grade. And at that time, a group called Blesco, I believe it was, BLESCO, which is still a scouting service that is around today. And, they kind of give you a grade. I reached out to the NFL even 30 years ago. They gave you a report back, and kind of, I think that said maybe mid-rounder. Blesco said, kind of second-rounder. Talked to some other people. Might have been the third guy drafted after Peyton and Ryan Leaf in that second or third round. It ended up being Brian Greasy in the third round. Could have been right there in that fold. So kind of entertained all that. I had a grade, and I made that decision. I want to go back to school. I want to be the number one quarterback.
Okay.
Could argue bad decision.
You could argue.
Couch and McNabb and Keely Smith, Kay McDown, Dante Culpepper. There are a few more guys coming back that next year. But anyhow, I had a hard grade. So let's say in this example, wide receiver gets grade 8.2. Okay?
Yeah.
8.2. And your best lineman that is left, let's say that Booker gets drafted, and a few of these guys get drafted, and the best lineman left is Gray Zabel. But Gray Zabel's got a 7.1 grade. Quite a disparity between the wide receiver and the offensive lineman. And, oh, by the way, down on the board in the second and third round is a Tate Ratledge from Alabama, who I'm going to preview. Some of these guys' names you'll hear me preview over the next few weeks. And they've got a grade of like 6.7, 6.9, 6.8. There's 3, 4, 5 guys in that second round that, are sitting there with a grade very similar to Gray Zabel. So what do you do?
So here's a couple of questions.
You take the best available player with the best available grade, who is in your 15 years of doing this, in your 30 years of doing this. This is your business. This is what we do. We take emotion out. We have a hard, fast grade, so we can go in there and not make the wrong decisions. We're all on the same page.
I refuse to believe I refuse to believe that in 2025, with everything that has been, all the resources that are poured into the NFL and the billions of dollars generated in that league and the millions of dollars being made by all of the decision makers in that league, with all of the pressure and all of the focus and everything that goes into this 3-day event in the draft, I refuse to believe that it's as simple as just grading players. It just doesn't make any sense. You're telling me that you just give every player a grade, and then at the end of it, you're like, well, 8.4, 7.2. Guess we go with 8.4.
Okay, so can I pause you before you get emotional? Before you get emotional.
I'm not getting emotional.
Not time to get emotional.
I'm literally being specifically the opposite of that.
Michael, we got to separate emotion from business. We're talking business.
I don't believe that in 2025 that it's that simple.
Is it in baseball with these 2080s? When I see all these scouts, and by the way, this team, Regis Jesuit, this powerhouse out in Denver, who's got 8 kids all committed to D1 schools, including Vanderbilt.
No, it's not, because they have different positions they play.
Those scouts, they all put their grades on those players.
It is not that simple.
And here's 5 tools, and we rate you in these 5 tools because we've done this for 50 years.
No.
So we have a pretty good baseline of what this should look like?
No, it's not.
All right.
It just isn't, and nor should it be. I don't believe it's that simple in football. You're telling me that there's no value put on positions? Of course there is. That there's no, and you just mentioned it yourself, that there's no thought to what else is available in that draft and what you could get later. Of course there is. So again, like I think that
what you get later has to all have grades on it. All has to have a perspective
I'm not saying you don't
what
have
is
a
later
grade,
tied to what is in front of you.
But
so
looking
you
at
do
wide
have a
receiver
feel.
versus wide receiver, sure, okay, yes, you've got to have grades in order to help you determine which wide receiver you would prefer.
Yes, and
but comparing a wide receiver to a guard and just looking at their overall grade is insanity to me. There's no way that's what they're doing. You have to have some sort of weighted value to different positions. Otherwise, you're comparing apples to oranges, which doesn't make any sense.
So that is what you're looking for, and that is what I will try to determine over the next 2 to 3 weeks and talking to people that are in those war rooms. And what you're basically talking about is, do you put like a premium? Okay, so here's your neighborhood, right? Here's your valuation. Here's the price of your home. And you know what? Do you get a little bump for a view? Do you get a little bump for waterfront? Do you get a little bump for, a better school that's closer to this home than it is to that home? The little premiums then that you, build onto there. Yeah, I think I would imagine you would have to do that for the need that everybody has for offensive
You're calling
linemen.
me Michael like you're lecturing me. What is going on here? I'm being very calm and describing an opinion. You're accusing me of being emotional and lecturing me and calling me by my full name.
Just listen to your
volume.
What's the
matter with you?
The audience can hear your volume.
What is the matter with you today?
Maura, Lyle, do you hear the volume in his voice?
Oh,
do you hear the octave?
That's called oratory.
Did you hear
let me explain oratory.
Did you hear the pass and octave?
Friend.
We're going to call it the pass and octave. Did you hear the pass and octave? As it gets amplified there with a little bit of emotion, because Salk, I guess I waver between Michael and Salk, because Salk, when you get a little ramped up, I feel like it's a little more personal,
right? Rather
than just, hey man, this is a dilemma that everybody in this league is all falls under. There's not enough of these linemen for these teams.
But that's why I don't think you can be as simple as best available versus need. There has to be a third category where you're weighting your value. And I know you don't like the word value. Okay, let's come up with a different word. But you've got to be weighting the players in some way based on the positions they play and the impact that position can have, not just in the NFL in general, but to your system specifically, right?
Okay, so, and I think that's fair. And then I think the next step of that is to say, well, of course they do this. Just look at the pay grades between different positions.
Absolutely agreed.
Right?
Yes.
And this is where you and, it wouldn't get personal with you and Clayton, right? You never got personal with him. You're right. I apologize. He never got mad when he would be so dug into his spots, and you'd be like, John, can't we look beyond? Well, this is just what the numbers are. This is just what safeties get paid. This is just what corners get paid. This is just what nickelbacks get paid. This is just kind of, again, the valuation that is put onto these positions, Salk, in I think a fairly hard and fast way. And the franchise tag really plays a role in that more than it does, I think, in the draft. Right, the franchise tag gives all of these teams and agents and players of kind of a starting point of, hey man, here's the top 5 at the position. This is what they're getting paid. I fit here. I fit there. You can argue where you fit, but this is the number. Yeah, I do imagine that behind the scenes, there are different organizations that put different amount of premiums on different positions. And you've got to probably do that based on your scheme as well, right? So this kind of comes down to that
Brock,
whole
if you're
alignment.
not, you're doing a disservice.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not doing that, you're not doing the draft. I mean, like, you would be operating in the Stone Ages. So for the life of me, I can't imagine that it is as simple as, best available versus need. So once you kind of get beyond what I would consider to be a false dichotomy there, I think you have to start to consider what it is that they actually do want to do and how you're going to make a decision at number 18. It's why, for me, it would be insanity for them to take a wide receiver there, even if they think there's a great wide receiver there.
Mm-hmm. So I do feel like I've got a decent amount of information on this after the fact. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, and if I am, then I will ask and beg for forgiveness. But last year, Salk, in that war room, if Byron Murphy would have got picked, if the Rams could have come up to 14 and traded and could have, taken Byron Murphy, who they really, really wanted, and you were sitting there at 16, there was a really strong possibility that the Seahawks were going to take the corner that Philly took in the first round that ended up being an unbelievable player. How would you have felt about it? Because
how would I have felt?
To their evaluation,
I would have banged my head against a wall.
And to their grade, it was like, this dude is a difference maker.
I would have banged my head against a wall.
Okay.
It would have been an awful decision.
Okay. You to have two lockdown corners and Devin Witherspoon and that guy.
Yes.
And those teams that threw for a bunch of big third
it would have been an
downs
awful idea.
Okay.
I would have been incredibly frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
I would have
They
been.
may have, by the way, they may have traded down, and that guy, as it turns out, was still sitting there in the 20s. And you could point to Philadelphia, going, "Well, Philadelphia does nothing but draft big people, right?" No, they drafted two corners last year, and both those guys, one became a nickel, and one became
they draft other people and other types of players.
And wide receiver they've drafted in the first round.
But Brock, they can do it because they have the big people.
Yep. And you know what they would say? We were right on Cam Jerkins. Right, we took him in the late second round, and we developed him. We were right with our left tackle.
Once you are right about those guys, it's a whole lot easier to go in the second round or first round and take a smaller player who operates farther away from the ball. Yeah, all right. If you've got Jalen Carter from the year before, it's a lot easier to go get a cornerback. But when you've decided to take Devin Witherspoon the year before, you are starting to box yourself in. So it's not need. You don't need a defensive tackle. No, any more than you need a cornerback, but it has to be a level of value in trying to build a team where you're investing in the spots that are going to generate the most impact. And maybe that's ultimately the word I should use. Not best available, not need, impact. How are you going to impact your team? And maybe it takes a conversation of 10, 15 minutes to come up with it, but I think that's the word I'm going to start using.
Okay, good.
Impact.
Same word we've used for Mariners and their bats the last 3 years.
But in a completely different context.
Yep.
Impact. How are you going to impact this team? And I believe that players along the line of scrimmage are going to impact that team significantly more than a cornerback or a wide receiver. You need impact. And some of that is related to what's already on your roster. That doesn't make it need, but you do need to look at what you have versus, what you don't.
Okay, you know what word I'm going to use? Alignment. And actually, these 20 minutes got my mind racing in so many different ways. I may argue the biggest challenge with the drafts for the Seahawks for a period of 5 or 6 years was a lack of alignment.
Okay.
That early on in the program with Pete and with John, it was a very clear vision. And with the really good Dan Quinn's and the triumvirate that was very successful in a Bevel and there was alignment with the kind of player we need to fit this system. And as coaching drain, as lesser coordinators came in, as maybe Pete emotionally wanting players and pushing for players and demanding certain things as he wanted this thing, that maybe that alignment has fallen out of place in those years.
I think that's another good word to throw into this, and I would completely agree with that.
And as Mayock said, there's about 25 organizations out of 32 that are not aligned. The Dallas Cowboys are not aligned. When Jerry goes off yesterday talking about an esteemed agent, by the way, and is like, I don't even know his name. He don't even play a role in this. Micah Parsons, like, no, he actually does. And now you just totally, like Jenga, pull a piece out and make it very difficult on all the rest of us to stay aligned. And I think that alignment piece also has to be so critical in this evaluation. You better know exactly the kind of player you want for Ryan Grubb. You better know exactly the kind of player that you want for Mike McDonald.
Yeah.
And, you know, when teams are just turning over and turning over and turning over and turning over, how can you possibly know exactly the kind of pieces to be aligned with what you totally want schematically?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah, I would agree with that too. And maybe that needs to factor into this. But I'm going to keep coming back to this word impact and how you're going to impact the team. Text messages all over the map here, as you might expect. Banging your head into a wall might knock some sense into you, Salk. I like that one. That's funny. Salk, are you even listening to Brock? He already said it's not just comparing grades. You're comparing the disparity in grades with the depth and value later in the draft at the positions of need. Totally understand that. Yes, I did hear that. But I think it even goes beyond it. The other side of this, Salk, you're absolutely right. If Christian Haynes would have hit this past year, then go right ahead and draft a wide receiver. But he didn't. So now you have a position of great impact that unfortunately has not been solved.
But did he not hit because he was asked to do things? Again, this is
I don't
more
know
of a
the answer
question
to
in
that.
football than it is in baseball. I really do believe that now. It really is like, did he not hit because he was asked to do things within a scheme that he's just not good at?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yep.
But because it's not just Christian Haynes, it's his brother Phil Haynes and all of the other guys that have had the same problem and the same conversation around them. Until they get it right, I think they need to keep putting the resources at it. Maybe Christian Haynes does get it right. Maybe he is going to be the guy that they thought he would be when they drafted him a year ago. Great. I still think you should go on.
Or maybe he just didn't have the lower power and the lower body strength.
Brock,
Yeah.
I'm willing to suggest that he will. That with the right coaching, he will be the guy that they wanted him to be. They should still draft an offensive lineman.
Yeah, for
They
sure.
should still continue to invest in positions that are going to have more impact than in ones that aren't.
If you're Kevin Costner on draft day, and we'll be there 3 weeks from tomorrow. Holy cow, this thing is going to come fast. And you're Kevin Costner in the VMAC there on draft day. To Salk write on a note card and put in his pocket a first-round offensive lineman at all costs. No,
I don't.
You don't.
I don't, because I do think that there are other positions that can truly impact. It's not just need. Obviously, that's the position of greatest need. But if you have a defensive lineman that you think has greater impact on the game than whatever offensive linemen are available there, and you do think that you can get suitable or similar offensive linemen in the second round, I'm with you. I wouldn't do that for a wide receiver, but I might do it for a defensive tackle. I might do it if the right tight end was there. If you thought that it was a guy that was going to also really affect your running game and the things you say are important to you.
Do you think we'd feel different if we had a CD Lamb, a Jordan Jefferson, a guy at the very top of this league that just is? Do you think our optics and our vision would be a little different?
I don't think so, no.
You don't think so?
I really don't. Mine would not be. I'm just not sold on that as being like the relevant piece to get you over the top into a championship. So, well, we really do appreciate you guys watching our videos.
And remember, you can like it, you could subscribe it, you could download the Seattle Sports app so you never miss a minute.